Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Welcome to day 2 of the Essentials, season 4, though. We're so excited to have you all here. Polly, Maria, what's up? Here we go, day 2.
Hello, everybody. So happy to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, we're just gonna stare strangely at the screen while we wait for more people to show up. We've got, please, yes, Esso, Peter, thank you. Let's get the trend going. Please type in where you're tuning in from. I'm tuning in from Houston, Atlanta, super cool. India, Memphis. Oh, it's so cool. I love this part.
Awesome.
I love this part. Yeah. Maria, you should drop where you're tuning in. So we've got the Latino gang representation. Oh, Brazil, someone beat you. Oh, but you're not in Brazil right now, right?
No, I'm
That's right.
I'm in Texas right now, but I'm going back to Brazil tomorrow.
I'll get you next time. And Paul been us in DC. Amazing. Look, do you know Alexander Cipriano? He's based in Brazil. Y'all should hang out.
We should. We don't know each other in person. I know Maíra. Oi, Maíra.
It's such a beautiful city name, Florianopolis. Awesome. Cool. We're gonna just give people another minute or so to grab their whatever it is and run to the webinar before we get started. We can put some music on.
Just have a little pre-webinar dance.
Yeah, exactly. How are you doing this morning, Maria?
I'm good. A little bit tired, but I'm
I was like falling asleep last night by 11, and I was like, I guess we did talk a lot yesterday. I'm tired.
Yeah. I hope I can. I want to watch the other presentations today, so I will be around this afternoon as well.
Oh, awesome. Right on.
More present today.
Well, you tried yesterday. What do you think, Polly? Should we get this show on the road?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Here we go, y'all. All right. Maria, brace yourself for the intro. We'll be done soon. And for those of you who are still joining in, please drop in where you're tuning in from, but we're happy you're here. So on that note, Polly, you want to get us going? We're just gonna dance all morning. Photography.
I appreciate the energy.
I love it. Hey everyone, welcome. We are here for day 2. I can't believe it. Like, these always go by way too fast. Yesterday was amazing. Love seeing everybody tag us in the stories and IG stories and some Twitter or X posts or whatever it's called now. Keep that coming. Let us know how you're enjoying these sessions. So many great speakers, and we learned a lot, and thanks to everyone for the great questions, and we hope that continues today as well. My name is Polly. I'm the founder of Black Women Photographers, and I'm really happy to be co-hosting with Danielle from the Everyday Projects. So thank you guys for joining us.
Thanks, Polly. I love this time together we have with each other, and of course all the amazing speakers as well. It's really so much fun, and you're so right, it goes by like whoop, so fast. I can't believe we're already on day 2. For those of you who are joining for the first time today, I do see some familiar names from yesterday, so excited to have you back. The Essentials are free online classes about navigating the photojournalism industry made in partnerships with amazing, incredible grassroots photo organizations working toward inclusivity, equity, and access in the media. And we are the Everyday Projects, Black women photographers, and Photo Wings. I'm a community team member of the Everyday Projects, and the Everyday Projects is a global community of visual storytellers, all committed to using imagery to combat harmful misperceptions and to rise above persistent inequality. What a great goal to have, honestly. As a nonprofit, we work to provide opportunities for our global community and to provide structure, support, and direction for the diverse and worldwide range of everyday photography groups. So glad to have so many of you here from our communities today.
And Black women photographers, it disrupts the notion that it's difficult to discover and commission Black creatives. We're a global community and directory now of over 1,200 members in over 60 countries. And I also see some names in the attendance, which is great to see. And you can learn more about us at blackwomenphotographers.com. And again, we keep mentioning this, but this is free. And that's because of Photo Wings' support. Photo Wings is a nonprofit organization dedicated to utilizing the power of photography to further deeper thinking, communication, and action. Their extensive online content and Photo Wings outreach programs have myriad educational applications and possibilities.
Yes, thank you so much, Photo Wings, for your super wonderful support and also helping us build, the structures of the classes as well. Love all of our partners. We rock. Okay, but all of y'all rock too for being here. So with that, the essentials. Before we jump in, I do want to give a little shout out, hug, high five to those who are working tirelessly behind the scenes to make sure this all goes smoothly. Because truth be told, there's a lot of stuff happening behind the scenes that are like, but they are doing amazing at making sure it just, y'all don't, it's smooth. So those people are Rebecca Gibeon and Fiona Washira from the Everyday Projects, as well as Austin Merrill, who along with Peter DeCampo are the co-founders of the Everyday Project. So thank you to all of them as well.
Yes, and we're continuing this weekend today with some really incredible teachers, and those will touch on interesting topics. And throughout each session, just drop your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll make sure we get to as many of the questions as possible. Don't be shy; they're here to help you and answer your questions. So please ask away. No question is too dumb or whatever it may be that you think. So please just drop your questions throughout in the Q&A box.
Yes, and remember that each class is recorded and the videos will be available on the Everyday Projects, Black Women Photographers, and Photo Wing website. So please make sure to take note of our websites, URLs, social media handles. As Polly mentioned, Photo Wings also has a large, extensive archive of videos. So please, like if you take anything away today, screenshot this slide. Very important. And without further ado, y'all, let's get going. It is such a treat to have Maria Magdalena here with us today. I love her as a person, but I also just love her eye, her work as a photographer. She's so sensitive, and her approach to photography and poetry and beauty just shine through her work. So if you haven't checked out her work yet, all you have to do right now is jump onto her Instagram and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. Her work is like poetry. We were talking recently, and even though she's technically an early career photographer, she's already been published frequently in outlets such as the New York Times, Bloomberg, Le Monde, and the Washington Post, and is a grantee of the International Women's Media Foundation. And she just got back from the Eddie Adams workshop. I mean, for most people, it takes time, y'all, but Maria, damn, she's just like boom, 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 boom. So many accomplishments in such little time. So we're going to learn a lot from her today. She's based in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and is a member of the collective Agencia Farpa. Okay, as well as Everyday Latin America, Women Photograph and Diversify Photo. Today, she's going to be talking to us about some of her incredible work that actually just started off as an assignment, but grew into much more, and how you can also find these stories behind the headlines. So, Maria, bienvenida. Okay, not Portuguese, but I know you also speak Spanish, so
Thank you.
we're so happy to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm so grateful, and to all the organizers, thank you, Polly, Danielle, Rebecca, everyone that's behind this operation, organizing the webinars, and so happy to be here with everyone that's watching as well. A little bit nervous, but that's okay. It's gonna go well. So yes, thank you for that awesome introduction. The presentation I'm going to give today is called Beyond the Headlines. And let me just see if I can share my screen. Desktop. See here, sharing. Okay, see it?
Yes, perfect. It's not, yeah, there we go.
Oh,
yep.
Okay.
There we go. Perfect, perfect, Maria. You're good.
Whew. Okay. So the presentation I'll be giving today is called Beyond the Headlines. And in thinking about this title just in the last week, I first think it's important to take a moment to recognize the immense courage and unimaginable efforts of journalists and photojournalists that are currently and that have been covering the war in the last weeks, risking their safety and lives, especially those that are in Gaza right now, working under siege, blackout, an incessant bombardment, the dozens of journalists that have been killed, and those that are losing colleagues, friends, family, while covering these atrocities and bringing the world news from the ground in such horrific circumstances. So may they be recognized and their efforts recognized as well. And with that, for this presentation, I'm hoping to share some insights and learnings from my experience in covering news and in working on stories beyond the breaking news as well. And what this process has looked like and looks like for me. I thought that for that I could show some work from the first hard or breaking news I covered for a large international outlet that has since evolved into longer term work, personal work, covering the effects of drought and climate change in the planet's largest tropical wetland, the Pantanal. So I hope that with this, I can impart some insights into things that I've learned in my own journey and in navigating this often difficult profession that has no guidebook. And after the presentation, I'm also, you can drop, as Polly said, drop any questions in the chat, and yeah, you can send those and we'll have a Q&A afterwards. So I'll be answering questions after the presentation. So to begin the presentation, I'll be showing work first from the Pantanal. In 2020, wildfires burned about 1/3 of the entire wetland, which was going through at the time one of the most severe droughts in decades, leaving the wetland extremely vulnerable to fires. I was planning to go to the Pantanal for a while and connected with an organization that works with wildlife conservation in the northern part of the wetland called Pantera, who I went to spend some time with. And not long after arriving, the fires started to spread out of control, and I began to document what was happening, spending several weeks in the field covering the impacts of the fires and the drought and the efforts of the communities that were on the ground, the communities, the firefighters, the biologists, the veterinarians, and the volunteer groups that were confronting this disaster, while the government, which was then under Bolsonaro, was largely ignoring and minimizing what was happening, sending support far too late. And as the situation escalated, it was still not being reported. I think because then not so many people knew what or where the Pantanal was, I wrote an email to the Times correspondent in Brazil and to the international photo editor, explaining what was happening and including some images after after reporting on this situation for a couple of weeks. And after a few days of sending that email, they decided to run a story. So after running that story for several weeks and months, the Pantanal was in national and international headlines. And I think this is likely when many people that were previously unfamiliar with the region learned about it too, in devastating circumstances. But on the other hand, there was such a large response from the public side, and that was so critical for the Pantanal at that time, and that has had a lasting impact to this day. As it goes with many issues, though, especially environmental issues, all sorts of issues, social, environmental, political issues, the impacts far outlast the news cycles, and those threats continue at large. These are some of the stories that were published in September of 2020 in the New York Times. Just click through these. So I was reporting and photographing in the field, and we published a couple of stories in those months. And I was spending these weeks, I was in the ground, spending a lot of time with the teams that were on the ground responding to the situation and trying to tell stories that, that I wasn't seeing reflected in the media, trying to talk about what was happening in the Pantanal. And as I was saying, as it goes with so many of these issues, the impacts far outlast the news cycles. And most of those threats still continue at large. So this same region of the Pantanal was burning just last week. And the effects of the ongoing drought, the pressures on the wetland like deforestation and damming and wildfires have deeply affected and altered the wetlands ecosystem and the interconnected life that it sustains, especially the communities and their livelihoods, which depend on the wetland. So the time I shared with people here in the wetland itself had such a deep impression on me, and the time that I spent there and that I spend there, I found myself returning ever since. And this is also how the work kind of evolved into something longer term, which has been, evolving beyond the news headlines and the heaviness of crisis, looking at the community-based responses and solutions to protect the wetland, which is very resilient, and the interconnectedness of humans and this environment, this ecosystem that that needs protection, and what that looks like. So with that, I think continuing into the next slide, I wanted to talk a little bit about my process and things that I've learned in working, on news assignments and working in the field. So before going into the field, taking time to focus on research, making contacts, and preparation. Doing research and knowing about the issue. Doing research and knowing about the issue and place you are covering in depth. This might seem obvious, but it's important to do before going out for a story, because it will inform your storytelling process in the field. And for doing that, you should be asking yourself things like, what is happening and where? Who is this issue affecting? How and why? How is this issue being reported or portrayed? Whose story is being told? Whose is not being told? What aspects of this issue are being overlooked? And asking yourself these questions of who, what, when, where, why, and how are really important. And to dive deeper into these questions, I think reading books, articles, studies, local news, reaching out to people that work in the area, following this issue closely, all of this is so important for answering these questions. Also, building and maintaining relationships with local organizations and networks you might be working alongside. Your allies, and these are your allies, your partners, collaborators that are in the field. And it might include NGOs, community organizations or networks, institutions, research groups, and others on the ground that you might be working alongside and may help you, either in providing relevant information, making contacts, or aiding with logistics, collaborating in different ways on the ground. These relationships with local collaborators are fundamental and must also be, cared for. Your network will grow as you continue to do more work and delve into different issues. And in thinking about this, which is also really important for your logistical planning and visual preparedness, these often go hand in hand and come back, for me at least, they often go hand in hand and come back to the context that you make and to the relationships that you build. What will field reporting look like in the time that you have? Where will you go and who will you meet? How will you get around and where will you stay? So doing things like preparing a risk assessment and drafting an itinerary for field reporting. This of course depends on the situation and the kind of story that you're working on, or maybe it's a personal project. Sometimes most of the time, this planning will change, but it can really help guide you and also help you to think about how to tell this story, especially when time is limited. So with that, I'll take a sip of water. And also a note on thinking, on logistical planning and visual preparedness. In my own experience, sometimes I'll research for several weeks or even months before actually working on a story if I have that chance, if I have that time. And if it is hard news and you're working on shorter, if you have time limits, I will do any research and planning in whatever I can do in the time that I have before an assignment. It really does depend on the kind of story or coverage that you're working on. In the field, like in the work that I've been doing in the Pantanal, I'm often making contact with and working directly with local organizations and networks, especially in the more remote areas. So this includes local communities, scientists, researchers, and professionals that are working in the region. Many of those relationships end up becoming, friendships that you maintain over years and years. And those are also so important. I can't emphasize enough to the work that we do. And with that, once you're in the field, building trust in relationships. So storytelling depends on human connections. Storytelling is human connection. Without it, you really don't have stories. And it's an integral part of the storytelling process and of making images and telling stories through images. This, to build these relationships, to build trust, it's important to have self-awareness and mindfulness of the spaces and the situations that you step into. Meeting people where they are and listening, especially when meeting people or interviewing people, photographing people that are in delicate situations, if they are survivors of trauma or traumatic events. We must always practice compassion and empathy, respecting the humanity and dignity of those that you work with. And, a lot of times for me, this is just sitting and talking to people, or spending as much time as I can with them before even picking up the camera. And of course, this depends on, there are many different situations, but if I'm able to, I will spend as much time as I can with the person before, getting to the work of photographing. And a lot of times in this, in this process, it's important to discuss the work or the story that you are working on and discuss consent as well. Discussing consent builds trust. So this is really important. So a lot of the time you have to think about how to communicate to people what is what is the work that you are doing, the story that you are working on, and how you hope to spend your time with the person and document them for the story. Sometimes that might involve walking them through the process and the story that you're working on. Having consideration and honesty build trust, and informed consent is important for that in many situations. And also for challenging oversimplified narratives and misconceptions or misperceptions that may exist about a place or issue. This also depends on human connections and exchanges and the relationships that you build on trust. So thinking about what connects us, really listening, it can allow us to see and feel beyond what is most obvious, and finding the quiet moments amidst everything that is happening, whether that's, social, political turmoil, migration, conflict, or environmental issues, always coming back to what connects us and focusing on telling, these on human stories. And I included this quote from a recent presentation that I was able to attend by the amazing documentary photographer, Isadora Kozlovsky, that I think really sums this up. She said, "What it means to be with people comes before photography, to be in communion with people in the spectrum of their experiences." So, respecting that, respecting the time that you need to be with people, to establish trust, to build trust-based relationships, knowing how to be with people, listening and meeting them where they are. I think this all comes before photography, being human. And I think beyond, news and covering breaking news, looking beyond the breaking news, there are so many other stories. It's important to delve into those too, whatever it is that calls you and makes your heart beat. Tell that story. I think these also offer us a chance to challenge oversimplified narratives and misconceptions about places and issues, and to tell stories beyond whatever it is that the news cycles dictate, like human interest stories, or maybe those are stories from your community or where you live, stories that remind us of our interconnected humanity. I think those are so important and necessary. For a recent story in May of this year, I found myself back in the Pantanal wetland, this time on the Paraguayan side of the wetland. Was on the Paraguay River again, but not to cover drought or fires or work on a news story. I'd gone to Paraguay to visit family and to cover the presidential elections in April. And after covering the elections with my colleagues, we wanted to work on a story that was unique and special to Paraguay, which led us to the Aquidauán, which is this boat. The Aquidauán is this historic passenger boat and floating supermarket that's been navigating the Paraguay River into the Pantanal for decades. I had heard many stories about this boat, which is like a lifeline for the northern part of Paraguay. That's the Chaco and the Pantanal wetland. So the communities along the river, they depend on this boat for transportation and essential goods like food, medicine, and cargo, because for a significant part of the year, the roads become completely inaccessible due to rain and flooding. And that is if there are any roads. So every week, this boat travels up the river, making stops in different communities along the way. And we decided to do a story on this boat, because its days of navigating might be coming to an end because of road construction and passenger demand has gone down. Also, it's just become economically not feasible to continue running the boat with that. So we spent several days on the Aquidauán documenting life on the boat and its journey up and down the river, spending time with passengers and the boat crew, many that have worked on the Aquidauán for 20, 30 years. And this story was so special to work on because it's not often that Paraguay is covered. And I felt this was a chance to celebrate and document a unique part of Paraguayan history and culture. And after this story was published, I was just so happy to receive so many messages about people that, especially from Paraguay, that were somehow they're connected to the boat or that just appreciated the story. So that was really, really rewarding. We met a lot of people on this boat in the 3 to 4 days, the 3 days that we spent on it. This was a curious situation of a young policeman that was transporting a detained person, a prisoner, to the nearest courthouse for a hearing. And over the days that we spent on the boat, we kind of saw this friendship evolve over time between them, because they had to spend days together on the boat, on the river. This is Pitin. He's the boat's cook. He's been working on the boat for, I think, almost 30 years, if I remember correctly. He's making guiso, traditional Paraguayan food. This is Julio, the boat manager. He manages the cargo and the passengers that come on and off the boat. So this story was about documenting life on the Aquidauán, and the people, especially the boat crew and the passengers that give this boat life. It's like this place of this meeting point on the river that's really, I don't know, just this microcosm of Paraguay. And you see all these different people using the boat, and as it travels hundreds of miles up into the Pantanal. These are some of the vendors that work in the market, Sadi with her daughter and her grandchild. This is the policeman, Derlis, and his prisoner that were drinking tereré. I think on maybe one of the last days on the boat, they're drinking a traditional Paraguayan tea together. And this is Alan. He's one of the managers. His family is a boat. They build boats. They've been building boats in the Chaco and the northern part of Paraguay for many decades. And he was showing us the original plans of the boat. So this story ran in the Times as well, and very different to the other story that I worked on in the Pantanal. And it was just really something really refreshing to work on that, wasn't hard news. There's the Aquidauán. Returning to port. Oh, I'll go back. I'm not done yet. So yeah, this was a story about the Aquidauán, but it was also about the people that give this boat life. It was a story about human connections and about sitting with people and listening to their stories. I think that visual storytelling has a very strong capacity to connect us with our own humanity and with one another, to bring us closer and provoke thought and compassion and conversation and action before the issues that we confront. So I really encourage, anyone that's seeking out these kinds of stories to tell the stories that call to you and make your heart beat, because we really need those too. And that is the end of my presentation. I hope I made good time. I included some of my contact information here. If anyone wants to write me or connect on social media or by email, please feel free to also send me any questions that you might have, or doubts or whatever. If you just want to reach out, please feel free to do that.
So beautiful. Love it. Sorry.
Thank you. Fine.
No, sorry that Danielle was about to say something. No, that was
No, I was just, walking away per usual, just making weird noises. Aplauso, bravo. But Polly, go ahead.
No, just beautifully done, beautiful work. and beautiful, like I mean, just beautiful all around, but like you said, going beyond, and the why and the care and intention you put behind each story, it shows. I'll just dive right into the questions. The first one is, you are early on in your career and you've accomplished so much already. You mentioned you wrote to the Times correspondent. How did you summon the courage to do that, to take a chance, to put yourself out there? How did you find that confidence? Because it can be so intimidating.
So to answer that question, I had worked for the Times on a couple of occasions before covering what was happening in the Pantanal in 2020, maybe like, on a few occasions, but it was kind of sporadic. The first story that I did for the Times was about women in Samba, and that was a story that also was more of a human interest story, because I had a lot of friends that, were a part of this movement of women that were, occupying more space in the world of Samba and Samba circles in Rio. And I pitched that story together with a reporter at the time. I think that was in 2018. And that ended up getting, I guess that was like my kind of foot in the door. But after that, I didn't work many times with them. I was in contact with the correspondent for the Times in Rio at that time in 2020. And so when I was in the Pantanal, I was there for several weeks just covering what was happening independently. And I think the sense of urgency about what was happening, and the need to talk about what was happening, because at that time it wasn't being reported. I think that's what really moved me to write to him first, to the correspondent that I was in contact with. I had worked with like a couple of times before, and then to also reach out to the editor whose email that I had, and also, talk about just, present to him what was happening, what I was covering over the previous weeks. And then after that, it took some days to actually of insisting, on that this was a story and that it needed to be covered. And eventually it did become a story, and they did run a story about it, and several stories after that, because the situation continued for several weeks and months. But I think in that situation, which was very specific, like hard news situation, we are the eyes in the places that we are. We're bearing witness to situations that newsrooms in New York or London or wherever they might be, for international news outlets, they're not seeing what we're seeing. They don't have that sort of access. So I think the sense of urgency that I was feeling at that time and need to talk about what I was seeing and bearing witness to was what moved me to write to both the correspondent and the editor at that time. And I think that goes for other stories as well. It doesn't just have to be hard news. It can be, stories that you find particularly interesting, or that, are about where you live, or a situation that you're seeing unfold. I think, pitching stories about what matters to you, I think that's, and of course there is like an art to pitching stories, and that, you will evolve that over time, but paying attention to what those issues, what those topics are, and thinking about how to, turn those into stories and how to cover those, turn those into a pitch, and reach out to, whatever contact that you might have. And that could be, local news as well. It could be local news, or or international news. It could be any news outlet that you think might be interested. So I encourage anyone, all of you, to pay attention to what those stories that matter to you are, and how to turn those into a pitch, or how to reach out to people about those ideas. So
thank you for that. And you're right, there's definitely an art to pitching. Do you have any do's or don'ts for pitching? Any lessons you can learn, any lessons you can share that you've learned while you've been pitching?
yeah, so going back to, I think some of my process that I shared, I'll often spend several weeks, like, or months, delving into a story idea and researching and, doing whatever reporting or interviews that I need to on the ground before pitching. Or sometimes it is an idea that's I guess more hard news, and that's something that you're seeing happening wherever it is that you live, or close to you, that you think should be covered. And in those different situations, I will usually, it does depend on the situation and the kind of story, but yeah, do research and see if the story, if this issue, particular topic has been covered before. I think that's really important. And how it's been covered. Maybe this issue has been covered, but you're thinking about doing it in a different way. So you have to make that clear and explain, why this issue, why this topic, why this story matters, and find a way to put that into words. And if you have taken some images, you can include those in a PDF or within the email itself. And being concise about the idea, in the first, if you're, sending a cold email to an editor or to a writer, sometimes you'll pitch together with a writer, which I've done often as well, or develop an idea with a writer. You want to keep the text concise, but make sure you make clear why this issue or story is important. And if you have images, you can include those, and say that if this idea is of interest, you're open to discussing further, or you have further information. And a lot of times it can be frustrating. It's very frustrating pitching because editors are usually overwhelmed, and sometimes they won't send you an email back. And I think in those situations, if it's something that you're really that you're insistent upon, I'll usually try again. I'll reach out, after a week or two and follow up on the pitch, because sometimes it just gets lost in their emails. So I will follow up, but then if, they don't respond to the follow-up, maybe I'll think about taking the idea elsewhere, or, finding a plan B for the story that I want to work on.
And do you also include, you mentioned you include images, do you also include budget and other logistical stuff? And how long do you usually wait until you follow up?
Yeah, that's important too. So also making clear that, you have access to this story, and that you can tell it that logistically it makes sense, if, what that budget might look like to work on the story. Sorry, what did you say? How do I follow up?
How long do you wait until you follow up?
I'll usually wait, it depends, I think, on the story. If it is a hard news story, I'll wait, a couple of days. If it's something that's happening in the moment, do a quick follow-up. Or if it's something that doesn't have such an immediate time constraint, then I'll wait maybe a week, or maybe 2 weeks to follow up, or a week or two. I think it just depends on what the story is.
I don't know what you're talking about, Maria. I love pitching. It's my favorite thing ever.
I do love pitching. I think we need to pitch more.
Maria, I'm saying that sarcastically. Pitching is so oh no, it's really intimidating, and it's you're just putting your stuff out there and hoping, no. I was saying that sarcastically.
Yeah, and I feel like sometimes when you don't get a response, you feel like you're getting ghosted or something. And I know most of the time it's not that, but we tend to take it really hard on ourselves.
Yeah.
Oh, this idea sucks. No, it doesn't suck.
Yeah.
Editors oftentimes don't respond to emails.
Yeah,
or just
exactly. Yeah.
take a really long time. But something that I have heard from editors as well is like, keep pitching, because they do see the emails. A lot of times they do see the emails, and maybe that puts you on somebody's radar. Just as an, if you're cold emailing somebody or introducing yourself to somebody, like, and you say, I am in this place, I have this idea that I want to work on, that kind of puts you on an editor's radar. So I think that's also important. Pitching is important because of that too.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's a really, yeah, it's happened before where they don't take the pitch, but they say, hey, but great work, thanks for sharing, and like, please stay in touch. So pitching is also a great way to get your name out there, get editors familiar with your name and your work, even if it doesn't work out. Mm-hmm. And the same goes for grants and contests. Like, even if you don't maybe win the grant or contest, like, the judges are oftentimes, editors, or very prominent people in the industry who are looking at your work, and yeah, you may not win, but they might remember your name and be like, oh, that person's based there, cool, I'm going to write them on my list. So you just never know what might be happening that you're not aware of by just simply putting yourself out there, which yes, can be so hard and intimidating because it does feel like personal. But okay, so of course the pitching topic brought up a lot of questions because it is so gut wrenching. So before we close out the pitching theme, I just wanted to also quickly ask, like, if you do any research beforehand for the pitch, like, how are you paying for that research in pre-interview time? If you have to travel or stay in different places, like, has that ever happened to you personally, or maybe colleagues that, are you allowed to, like, how do you recoup those costs? And then to like tack on a question, I guess this is my MO. I 4 questions at once. So there's a way to like reach out to editors, right, with pitches, but you mentioned you reach out to contacts in the field, like organizations, as opposed to editors and publications. So how does that email look different than like a pitch email? What do you say in that email? So yeah, 2 questions. Are you paying for like pre-research interviewing? How do you recoup those costs? And then how does an email or initial contact with an organization look different than with an editor or publication?
So to answer the first question, usually in the research, if I'm doing research before, for a story that I'm particularly interested in, I mean, that's mostly that part of the process I'm mostly just doing like on my own at home. I'm reaching out to people, that might be working in the area or that might have been affected by a particular situation or issue, to try and find what that story is, to get more context, and and to really find what that story is, and like develop that before sending a pitch or an idea to an editor or to a colleague that might be interested in working together on the story. So most of that is done at home or on your own, like independently. So I think there's not many costs involved in like in that part. I mean, sometimes when you are working, like, I think independent projects are different because if it's like a long-term project, we're often looking for funding sources. That's not, maybe not for a particular like news story, but a longer term project. And I think those costs, eventually can be absorbed into like whatever funding you might be able to get. And that funding can come from so many different I guess sources, and that's a whole other topic, I think, for long-term projects. But it just kind of just depends. But most of the research and interviews or talks or chats that I'll just call people or send them a message like, hey, I'm a photojournalist, I'm really interested in this story, and I would like to talk to you, just expressing sincerity and interest in what's happening in a particular story, and kind of just start that way. So usually there's no costs really involved in that. And for the second question, reaching out to organizations, that's kind of related to that. Usually if there is a story I'm interested in, it's the same sort of situation. I'm sending an email to to an organization or to an association or network and trying to make contact with them. Maybe a friend or colleague has a contact that they'll share with me, or, I'll get that contact somehow and try and, build that bridge with an organization and see and discuss, if they would be interested in, working together, if getting a better understanding too about, what that story is and how you might be able to work on that, alongside an organization or, whoever it is that you're reaching out to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just for those of us in the audience who may not, like pitching, I was like, huh? Like when I first started, like, what are you talking about, pitch? So a pitch, just for those of us who may be still kind of scratching your heads a little bit, a pitch is like basically when you contact an editor of a publication with an idea or work maybe that you're doing and you want to pitch a story to them, or maybe it's just an idea and you don't have any work but you want to be put on assignment, or you could just be emailing an editor to say, hey, I'm based in this region, this is my work, would love to work with you in the future. So there's lots of different ways that you might want to reach out to an editor, but when you're specifically reaching out to them with a story or an idea, that's called a pitch. So that's what we're talking about here. And yeah, Maria, thank you. That was all just really, really good golden advice, in terms of following up and not taking things personally. So thank you for sharing that. And I'm going to get into another very, very, very important topic that you brought up in your presentation, and loved what you had to say about that. And that is revolving consent. So a couple of questions around that. So how do you deal with consent in more fast-paced news situation? Because as we know, sometimes like trust can take time. So when you don't have that time, what are some approaches that you utilize? And sometimes, particularly with the kinds of stories you do, it can be nearly impossible to get people to understand how and where the photographs might appear. So how do you sort of break that down for people? And yeah, we'll start with that.
Cool. Yeah, so in fast-paced like news coverage situations, it is obviously, this looks different because you don't have the time to, sometimes you don't really have the time to like sit down and talk to somebody about what it is that you're doing, what the story is that you're working on, how these images will, where they'll appear, and and talking through consent and how you would like to spend a time with a person, because maybe you're covering a protest or like political rally, or something where you have to be moving around a lot and it's fast paced and you just don't have that time to talk to people. I think in a lot of those situations, people will understand that you're press and that that's what you're doing. So I think that, and if they don't want to appear in a photo, they will probably make that clear. So I think that's more for fast-paced news situations. Or you can, I rely a lot on my intuition too. So it's like, you can feel if somebody's clearly uncomfortable with the presence of press, or if they don't want to be in an image, and or sometimes they will express that, and then that non-consent is given, that so in those situations, obviously you don't photograph those people that don't want to appear, but in those situations, a lot of times, yeah, people understand that you're press and that you're there covering a particular situation or event. So in fast-paced news situations, yes, it is different. And sometimes you do get a chance to like exchange a quick idea with somebody, and they're like, oh, who are you? Who do you work for? And then you can say, I'm working on this story and I'm covering this event. Can I, is it okay if I take pictures? So I think there's different ways that consent or non-consent can be given, and you just have to be self-aware of those situations, and of course respect people's wishes. It's I think it's something that you can also feel in different situations as well.
So important. Thank you for that. Just gonna go to the next question. With the topics as complex as these climate change and environmental stories, I want to ask Maria, how do you navigate? Because most of the time these topics makes you jump into all sorts of different directions. So how do you focus, or should I say, narrow it down to what basically will be your narrative?
Mhm. So that's actually that's like a challenge for me, because you get so overwhelmed by everything that's happening. And I think that's that's the challenge that I like, that I faced in covering the situation. But it does come down to the time that you spend with people, I think, like, thinking about what is the most interesting, I guess. What do you think, what is the story that you want to tell within all of this? And for me, that's really guided by the people that I spend time with, by the stories that I'm seeing, um, that I think do allow for that human connection. And that, you know, I think how these issues affect us, that's, environmental issues, how they're affecting us directly or indirectly, that's something that really interests me. So I tend to seek that. Of course, how this is devastating for, how this is affecting the environment and nature and the ecosystems, but also how that's affecting us. And, finding those human stories within everything that's happening. I tend to gravitate towards that because it's something that's like, I guess, easier to follow too, because you're connecting with that person or with that community, and focusing in on a story, or I think that really helps you, like, understand how to talk about what's happening on a larger scale. And yeah, that's a challenge that I actually face, because it is like, so it's such a large issue. And trying to think about how to best represent that, and tell the different ways in which environmental issues are affecting us. It's difficult, and I think that's one of the big challenges with environmental stories,
Definitely.
climate change stories. Yeah.
But usually, to also add to what you're saying, like for the person who asked that question, that's why it's always great to have great editors
Yeah.
help, bring, like, maybe if it is all over the place, they'll help, bring it to whatever focus it should be as well. So you don't have to have too much stress on that end, because they will help reel it in as well. I'm gonna go to this other question. You mentioned earlier briefly about like who should tell a story. How do you decide if you are the right person to tell the story?
How do you decide? I think it also comes back to a question of like connection, and how you connect with the story, or how you connect with a particular issue. If it's something that affects you, and it's something that if affects you personally, and you want to talk about that, then of course I think it really comes from like a feeling of identification, or a feeling of this is something that's important to me. And maybe it's not affecting you directly, as a photojournalist or as a photographer or journalist, but it's something that deeply matters to you, and you're connected to this issue in other ways, and that's something that drives you in the work that you seek to do and talk about these issues. Then I think that's relevant too. So you really have to feel like what, if you are the right person or not. I think that comes from a feeling and a sense of identification too, like, and that can take time, like, to understand that, like, if and of course it's there's so many different situations, but yeah, maybe it's just something that deeply matters to you, and you have a connection to a particular place or community and you want to talk about these issues, then I think that's relevant too. And of course, if it's something that's affecting you directly and you're not seeing these stories represented, or it's something that that you think should be represented in a different way, I think, yeah, it just really comes from feeling and this sense of identification with whatever issue or story that you want to tell.
Mhm. Yeah, that's so important. That feeling of connection. And like you said, like if you don't see it happening in the media, I mean, someone brought up this question the other day in the meet and greet, like, is there even space for these stories that sort of go beyond the headlines or that show daily life? And I think we all agreed that, yeah, there's an absolute
there's like a need for
yeah,
those
a need and like a craving almost
Mhm.
for it, because so much of what we do see in the media is, like you said, the more sort of simplified stories that can really run the risk of, being sensationalized or stereotyping a community.
Yeah, or like, yeah, focusing on the news focuses on crisis most of the time. So it's, I think looking beyond the crisis is just so important. And I think people do have a need to connect with other stories. So I think those human interest stories, those other stories beyond those news headlines are really, really important. Like with the Kidawan story, with the boat story, I got so many messages after it published and people were just like, thank you, like for showing me something about this region that I had even Brazilians don't really know that much about their neighboring country, Paraguay, because it's never represented. And I think people were really happy to, see something coming from Paraguay and like to be able to connect with that. And it's not, something about crisis. It's
yeah, and I think your images too are so poetic. Like, oh, they're like delicious little candies. Like when I look at your work, I'm just like, I feel so fulfilled visually. And I really love what you said about telling the story of an issue through individuals, because I think sometimes as photojournalists, journalists, right? We're journalists at the end of the day, and we want to try to tell the issue by trying to focus on every single individual that's been affected by that issue, because we want to do our job really well and make sure that, every person is represented and like, look at this issue, it's affecting thousands of people. So I'm going to try to photograph thousands of people. And sometimes, actually, most of the time, if you can just highlight the issue through the story of one person or a community in the way that you have mentioned, I think sometimes that can be a lot more powerful than trying to tell dozens of stories not so deeply,
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so I love
I
that
think
you brought that
you
up.
do that beautifully in your
Ah.
long-term work.
No. We're talking about you,
Okay.
Maria. Stop that. Let's get into, but thank you. Let's talk about risk and safety, because we have a lot of questions about that too. As part of your preparatory process, you mentioned that you make a risk and safety assessment. So what is that actually? Can you like just break that down a little bit? Tell us a little bit about your process.
Yeah. So usually, especially if I'm going like out into the field or to a more remote area, I definitely do, risk assessments before. And that can be something they've become, I guess, more elaborate as I've gained more experience. It's something that I've worked into my process before working on a story. Usually that looks like, so a risk assessment. It's like evaluating looking at what any potential risks while you're working in the field might be. So I tend to look at it like in terms of the time that I will be spending in the field and the places that I will be, who will I be with, and what might the risks be while I am in the field working. So sometimes I'll look at that like on a day-by-day basis, if maybe it's just if it's a shorter assignment, or if usually it's for longer assignments. And in that process, also communication is really key, knowing that is keeping contact with the editor, with whoever you're working on, and keeping in contact with somebody like a friend or a family member throughout the time that you'll spend reporting on a story or working on a story in the field. Communication is really key to that. So establishing some sort of communication protocol, sharing your location with a particular person or friend. I always do that if I'm in the field. That's, I'm sharing my location. I share my location on my Find My on the app on my iPhone. And sometimes I'm, taking a little like GPS device also. I think that's only for some situations if I don't have internet access or cell phone, signal. But the risk assessment, I think, is really important and helps you also understand what your time in the field might look like. So I think about the logistical preparation, which the risk assessment is a part of, together with visual preparedness too. So like thinking about that time that you'll be spending in the field and what that looks like, what the risks might be, and thinking of all this together, having a contact list, keeping people informed. And yeah, those risks, they might be anything from, and this of course, again, depends a lot on the issue or whatever topic or story you're covering or working on, but, those can be physical risks or, psychological risks or emotional risks. Like if it's something that you think might affect you emotionally or psychologically, being aware of that and knowing and having the resources and people that you can like talk to through that, I think is really, really fundamental. And having community, like that's a big part of mitigating like risk. So being in contact with people and having community and being, having spaces where you can talk about different issues and strategies to mitigate risks that you may or may not face in the field. I think it really depends, but yeah, that's an important part of my like logistical preparation. And it might not even take that much time. Like it could be something simple, like, having a contact list and just understanding where you'll be, what the time demand will be for working on a story, and keeping people informed about your whereabouts and how you're doing.
No, thank you. We really appreciate breaking down your process, and the Everyday Projects team also dropped in the chat our previous class that we did on managing risk and safety and trauma in the field. It's nearly 2 hours of just further unpacking what that looks like on top of the already great advice that Maria shared. We have time for like one more question. So I'm going to ask that someone said earlier, any tips for honoring those who you come in contact with when you're researching and photographing, and also any tips to get accurate information without bias or oversimplifying narratives?
Yeah, definitely. I think this also comes back to like working alongside, local community-based organizations, and, being in direct contact with whoever those organizations and networks are that, that are acting on the ground, and finding different ways to collaborate together. I think that can take many different forms, but like building those relationships with those organizations and networks is so important because of that. And also, I think to understand an issue more deeply, I think having that contact is really fundamental. And, whoever you might meet through those organizations, I think the misconceptions and, misconceptions and misperceptions are challenged through people's human stories, and you might come to understand an issue in a completely different way, and see it misrepresented in media. And I think that's why telling human stories is so important, and honoring those relationships that you build with people and that you build with organizations, community organizations, and community networks, whatever network there might be around a particular issue, or works with a group of people, and finding ways to collaborate with to have a mutual relationship with those groups is really important. And I think, yeah, I don't know if that answers the question well, but that's something, at least to me, is really crucial.
Yes, you have answered every question in a very profound and beautiful ways. You are so special, and it's been such a treat to hear you. The inner workings of Maria's brain has just been really lovely to sort of demystify how you make these beautiful poetic images and how you make it happen. So thank you, Maria, so much for being with us here today and sharing so much knowledge and expertise and advice, and for just being able to look at your beautiful photos. I feel recharged and replenished. So thank you so much.
Thank you both. Thank you both so much, Danielle, Polly, Everyday Projects.
And everyone, I hope you have a second while Polly and I, do the little outro bit, our little song and dance. I hope you take some time to look in the chat. Everyone has been really gushy about you and everything you had to share. So
if people have other questions too, I can send my email and you can send those. I'll send my email in the chat. It was on the presentation, but if you didn't catch it, I'll just drop it here. Well, where's the chat? Here it is.
Thank you so much, Maria.
I actually don't know how to. Oh, so this is the Q&A. I don't know how to. Oh,
you can drop it in.
Okay.
You found it? Okay.
Yeah.
Sweet.
Again, thank you. What a beautiful way to kick off day 2. We're gonna start day 2 second class in just a moment with Zakia Woods. She'll be talking about how she juggles 2 of the hardest jobs in the world, photojournalism and parenting. And before we start that, we want to again thank Photo Wings for making the essentials free and available to all of our beautiful attendees and those who will watch after. Again, this is season 4 of the Essentials, so that means there's been 3 previous seasons of amazing classes that you can also check out and replay, and those again are free to do so because of the Photo Wings' support.
Yes, thank you, Photo Wings. And for those of you who may not know, Photo Wings is a nonprofit whose mission is to highlight and help facilitate the power of photography to influence the world. They help photography to be better understood, created, utilized, seen, and saved, which is exactly what we're all doing here today. And speaking of save, another reminder, starting to sound like a broken record, but I really don't want any of y'all to forget that these classes will be recorded and published online forever and ever and ever on the Everyday Projects website, Black Women Photographers, and Photo Wings. So follow us on social media to get updates on the essentials and all the other really cool stuff. This isn't the only cool thing we do that we're doing in our communities, and take advantage of all of these free resources. Yeah, so thanks, guys.
And for